While Judith Carter lay on a ventilator, her niece Allison threw a party in her house. Allison's boyfriend Brett used Judith's credit card to pay for catering and lounge furniture. They called it a memorial. Judith was still alive. Now she's back, walking, talking, watching, and her new heir, Beverly, the woman who stayed, stands at her side. The family came for her funeral. Judith came for the reckoning. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The machine hissed in rhythm beside her, quiet, calculated, indifferent. Tubes ran from Judith Carter's body like the tangled roots of an ancient tree, threading oxygen, medication, and fragility into every breath she couldn't take on her own. In the fluorescent hush of Tacoma General ICU Room 407, her body lay unmoving beneath a white hospital sheet. Her face, pale but determined even in stillness, was framed by graying curls that once refused to be tamed. The monitors pulsed in steady greens and reds, oblivious to what was happening 15 miles away in her own backyard. At 62, Judith Carter had been many things: ER nurse, homeowner, widow, the kind of woman who folded towels with corners sharp enough to count as opinions. But in this moment, she was quiet, unresponsive, a woman not quite between worlds, but close enough to feel the shift in gravity. Outside, the hospital murmured with shift changes and soft-footed nurses. Inside her mind, silence expanded like space. And then, music, a faint pulse, bass, laughter. It shouldn't have been there. Not in an ICU, not in her head. And yet, beneath the hush of beeping machines and ventilator rhythms, a sound stirred. Across town, the back gate of Judith's house swung open with a squeak no one heard over the Bluetooth speakers. A plastic banner arched between two apple trees read, "Life's too short to be serious." Beneath it stood Allison, Judith's niece and, temporarily, her legal power of attorney. Blonde, breezy, and barefoot in espadrilles, she raised her rosé and laughed. "Let's celebrate the vibe, okay?" she shouted to the small crowd gathered near the rented fire pit. "Judith would totally hate this, so it's probably perfect." People clinked glasses. A DJ booth thumped softly from the patio. Someone fired up the grill. Inside, a charcuterie tray sat half-devoured on the antique dining table. Judith's quilt, the hand-stitched one her late husband loved, had been shoved over a lawn chair. "Who brought white wine?" Brett called from the kitchen. "This is a red mood house." Allison threw her head back and laughed again. Too loud, too rehearsed. "Brett, check the fridge in the garage," she called. "That's where I stash the good stuff." Judith always hid things out there like it was Fort Knox. In the crowd, no one mentioned the hospital. No one asked how long she might survive. They passed by the framed photos on the mantel, Judith in her scrubs with co-workers, Judith with a young Allison on her hip, Judith grinning beside a tomato plant taller than she was, and they never paused. Back in the ICU, a nurse adjusted the IV line. "Pressure holding steady," she said to another. "She's stable, still not verbal, but..." She twitched. "Spasm?" the second asked. "No," the nurse said slowly, watching Judith's eyelids. "Response." Meanwhile, Beverly Fields, Judith's closest friend for nearly 3 decades, sat in her parked car outside the grocery store when her phone buzzed. The text was from a neighbor 3 doors down from Judith. "Beverly, you need to see this." Attached. A photo. Judith's house, balloons, lawn lanterns, a man in board shorts at her grill. The caption, number sign, life support party. Beverly didn't blink. She didn't curse. She didn't even finish loading her trunk. She pulled the car door shut and drove. Back in the hospital, the music swelled louder in Judith's ears, though no one else could hear it. Her brows tensed, her fingers twitched, her lips parted ever so slightly. And under the hum of the ventilator, Judith Carter, nurse, widow, betrayed homeowner, began to wake. Not out of peace, but out of something colder, quieter, sharper, like a memory sharpened into a blade. And though she could not yet speak, her body remembered the sound of being erased. It would not forget again. The first sound Judith Carter heard clearly was the soft, hydraulic groan of her hospital bed adjusting itself, then the scrape of a plastic chair, then breathing, not hers, but someone else's, shallow, nervous, familiar in the most irritating way. Her throat ached, her body felt hollowed out, but her eyes opened, slowly, deliberately. "Allison." "Hey," her niece whispered, too brightly, as if she were greeting someone at brunch instead of someone who'd just come off life support. "Look who's awake." Judith blinked, dry-eyed, silent. Allison's smile faltered only slightly. She reached for the paper cup of hospital coffee on the tray and took a sip, as if it made her presence more natural. "I've been checking in, of course," she said. "So glad you're okay. It was really touch and go there for a while. Scary stuff." Judith didn't answer. She stared. Allison glanced around the room, then lowered her voice. "Anyway, I know this probably isn't the right time, but bills are starting to pile up and the house is a lot. You've got space you don't use, and hospice care options were mentioned if things don't—" She broke off with a shrug. "I just think it's time to talk about next steps." Judith closed her eyes again, not out of fatigue, but to avoid what she feared she might say. "Not yet. Let her talk." The nurse entered with a quiet knock, carrying a tray of soft food Judith had no intention of eating. She checked vitals, adjusted Judith's IV, and gave Allison a glance that meant, "You've said enough." Allison took the hint and stood. "I'll come back later," she said. "Let you rest." The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the nurse leaned in close. "She doesn't know I'm doing this," she said softly, slipping something from her scrub pocket. Judith recognized it by touch before sight. Her phone. "She dropped it off," the nurse added. "Said you'd want it when you were strong enough." Judith gave the smallest nod. The nurse smiled and stepped out, closing the door behind her. Judith turned on the phone. Dozens of notifications, but she skipped them all. Straight to the gallery. The first photo stunned her. Her own living room, transformed into a party scene. Red Solo cups, glittery banners, strangers on her rug, a tray of Jell-O shots on her vintage piano bench. She flipped to the next, someone raising a champagne flute in front of her wedding portrait. Then the kitchen, half-eaten cake smeared across her counter, open wine bottles, her quilt, his quilt, crumpled over a patio chair, a dark stain blooming at the edge. Judith didn't cry. She kept scrolling. Hashtags, "She Jude vibe," "She life support party," she would want this. She reached the screenshot last, a Venmo pool titled, "For Aunt Judy's Send-Off Bash." The description read, "Champagne ain't free, y'all. Let's honor her with flair." She stared at the screen for a long, long time, then opened messages. Only one person she needed. Judith. Change everything. Start with the locks. The text sent. Delivered. Read. 5 seconds later, Beverly replied, "Already in motion." Judith set the phone on her lap. Her heart was slow, but her mind was clean. Allison had danced in her house like she was already gone. Brett had toasted over her rug. Strangers had stood in her kitchen like they'd inherited it. Let them taste what it felt like to lose something. Judith stared at the pale ceiling tiles overhead, a grim little smile just beginning to form. She wasn't going anywhere. But some people? They were already out. Judith Carter stepped through her front door for the first time in 23 days. Beverly held her arm, not for weakness, but in silent acknowledgement of what the moment required. Judith didn't pause on the threshold. She walked straight in, chin high, like a woman crossing into occupied territory she still legally owned. The smell hit first, a nauseating blend of stale beer, overly sweet vanilla candles, and whatever cheap cologne Brett considered signature. Her hardwood floors, once spotless, were peppered with glitter fragments and bits of crushed tortilla chips. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, eerie in its domestic normalcy. Judith didn't speak. She moved from the entry to the living room, pausing only to remove her shoes. Not out of habit, but defiance. Her house had been violated. She would not let it take anything more from her souls. The living room was worse than the photos had captured. Plastic cups lined the windowsill. Her fern, dead, A sticky ring on the coffee table matched the base of a champagne bottle half crammed under the couch. A branded party napkin lay folded on her armchair, number Jude Vibe. The font was gold foil. Her stomach turned. Beverly followed quietly, letting Judith lead. They moved through the rooms like forensic analysts. The guest bath still smelled like mint body spray and potpourri. One of the hand towels had makeup smudges, another had a cigarette burn. Judith noted everything, mentally filing away each indignity with clinical precision. In the dining room, she found the first disposable camera, then another on the kitchen counter, both half-used. She collected them wordlessly, placing them in a cereal bowl like expired medicine. She opened the fridge, a half-eaten veggie tray, cheap white wine, and someone's leftover sushi. None of it hers. The magnet on the freezer door held a note. "Glad you're back. Let's discuss next steps for the house." Alice and Judith stared at the loopy handwriting, then pulled the note down and folded it cleanly into a square. She slid it into her robe pocket. A keepsake. Not sentimental. Evidentiary. "Are you ready?" Beverly asked gently. Judith didn't answer. She walked into her study. Every drawer had been opened. The curtains were drawn unevenly. Her vintage bookshelf leaned forward at an odd angle as if someone had tried and failed to move it. But her safe was untouched. She unlocked it quickly, fingers moving with the precision of years spent counting meds in trauma bays. Inside, the financial binders were there, the backup hard drive, the notarized will. She exhaled, then relocked the vault. In the hallway, Beverly unzipped her leather tote and pulled out a manila folder. "The list," she said, "from the photos, RSVPs, and a few social media check-ins. I triple verified." Judith opened it and scanned the names. A cousin from Spokane she hadn't spoken to in a decade. A niece who hadn't returned her Christmas cards in 4 years. Names she barely remembered. Names that didn't deserve a single moment on her rugs, her porch, her time. "They came for a party," Judith murmured. "Not a vigil, not a prayer. They came for the idea of you," Beverly said. "Not the reality." Judith tapped the list against her palm, then nodded once. "I'll need 2 more copies," she said. "One for the attorney, one for the investigator." Beverly smiled faintly. "Already done." Judith walked to the master bedroom last. Her bed was made, but the corners weren't hospital-tight. A subtle insult to muscle memory. On the nightstand sat a half-burned candle labeled Coastal Breeze. She picked it up, sniffed it, and sneered. "Smells like wet entitlement." They both laughed. Quiet, sharp. Later, while Beverly made tea in the kitchen, Judith sat at her desk with the folded fridge note beside her. She opened her planner to the next blank page. At the top, she wrote in all caps, "Next steps." Then she smiled, because she had just begun them. The texts began 2 days after Judith Carter re-entered her home. They didn't come all at once. They dripped in, one by one, like water from a cracked faucet. Cousins she hadn't heard from since the Clinton administration suddenly flooding her inbox with cheerful emojis and suspicious concern. "Hey Aunt Jude, just saw you're out, so relieved, LMK if you need help with anything. Hope recovery's going smooth. Heard the house is kinda big for one person now, huh? Glad you're okay. If you're revisiting that will, let me know. I mean, we're family." Judith read them all in silence, thumb still, face flat. She didn't respond. She just screenshot each one and sent them to Beverly with the subject line, "Cataloging delusion." By Thursday, a voicemail came from Uncle Don, her late sister's ex-husband, who had never paid child support, let alone visited her in the ICU. "Hey Judy, I just wanted to check in. You know, with things the way they are, I figured we ought to chat about the estate. Technically, I was family once, too." Judith tapped play 3 times just to make sure she'd heard it right, then saved it to her archive folder labeled Shameless. That afternoon, Beverly showed up with a burner phone, a yellow legal pad, and an arched eyebrow. "I'm documenting every call and message, time-stamped, source-tagged, forwarded to the estate attorney." "I haven't even changed my will yet," Judith said. "You're about to," Beverly replied. They sat at the dining table, new tablecloth, fresh tulips, Candle snuffed, and Judith opened her fireproof binder. The old version of the will was still inside, dated 2 years ago, drafted by a conservative firm and dry as bone. She slid it across the table. "Take her off," she said. "Allison." Beverly nodded. "Executor? You?" Beverly didn't smile, didn't argue, just nodded again and made a note in her binder. Judith picked up her tea, blew across the surface, and sipped. "Let's get a notary." "Already called," Beverly said. "Tomorrow morning. I booked a locksmith too, full Reiki, and a private estate planner in Olympia, works with fiduciary abuse cases." Judith blinked, impressed despite herself. "You don't waste time." "No," Beverly said, "and neither do vultures." By evening, Judith had a fresh copy of the guest list beside her, and she began marking names, not out of revenge, but accuracy. Cousin Marla sent 2 texts about getting together soon. Cousin Luke was tagged on Instagram by the fire pit with someone else's beer. Allison's college friend Jenna used the guest bath and left behind an empty lash case. Each name had a symbol, a check for contact, a dash for silence, a $sign if they'd ever borrowed money. The page began to fill, notations, circles, arrows. "Judith," Beverly said, pausing at the kitchen counter. "What exactly are you building here?" "A record," Judith answered. "Not for them, for me. I gave without keeping receipts. That ends now." Later that night, the locksmith arrived, a broad-shouldered man named Eli who didn't ask questions and worked quickly. He changed the front, back, garage, and side door locks. Smart system installed, custom access codes created, only 2 keys made, both in Judith's pocket. When he finished, he handed her the code booklet. "You can track entries by time and user." "Perfect," she said. "I like knowing who thinks they still belong." The next morning, the notary arrived. Judith, wrapped in a clean linen blouse and soft trousers, signed the new documents in blue ink. Her hand was steady, her signature sharp. She handed Beverly a sealed envelope. "Executor instructions. You don't need to open it now." "I will when the time comes," Beverly said. Judith gave her a long look. "That time won't be soon." "No," Beverly agreed, "but it'll be yours." That evening, as the sun slid low over the Tacoma skyline, Judith stood by her bedroom window with the burner phone in hand. A new text buzzed in from a cousin she hadn't seen since her mother's funeral. "Glad you're back. Hope you're not mad. I just didn't know how serious it was." She typed a reply, then deleted it. Then typed again, "You weren't confused. You were absent." She didn't send it. Instead, she turned off the burner phone and placed it in a drawer she now locked. Not out of paranoia, out of precision, because she was building something now, patiently, methodically. And when it was finished, it wouldn't be a warning, it would be a reckoning. Judith Carter answered the call with a cough and just the right amount of feigned disorientation. "Allison?" she croaked. "Aunt Jude. Hey!" Her niece's voice burst like champagne on speaker. "Just checking in. You sounded tired last time. Wanted to float something by you." Judith let the silence stretch long enough to sound foggy. "I've been talking with Brett's guy. He's a certified wealth consultant," Allison continued. "He could help consolidate your stuff. It's probably a lot to manage alone." Judith nodded slowly, though no one could see. "Sure," she said, barely above a whisper. "I guess it wouldn't hurt to hear." "You'll love him," Allison chirped. "Super respectful, very discreet. Tuesday work?" "Tuesday's fine," Judith murmured. Then she hung up, set the phone down, and reached for her notebook. She drew a small X beside the phrase, "Played dumb, financial guy," then underlined the next step, "Transfer every damn dollar." By that afternoon, every bank account Judith held was consolidated into a new private trust with restricted access, her name and Beverly's only. The old joint checking, the one Allison had convinced her to open for emergencies, was drained and closed. She shredded the debit card slowly, strip by strip, then dropped the pieces into a glass bowl and burned them with a long match. The smoke smelled faintly like citrus plastic. The nurse from the ICU, Maria, stopped by with flowers and a smile. They sat on the porch, Judith with a cup of lemon water, Maria with coffee. I wanted to thank you again, Maria said. We all weren't sure you'd make it. Judith looked at her over the rim of the glass. I was told certain meds weren't approved. Maria's smile faltered. They were delayed, not by us. The POA didn't sign. Said it wasn't worth the risk if the outcome wasn't likely. Judith set the glass down. You mean Allison? Maria hesitated, then nodded. Noted, Judith said. Thank you for confirming. That night, she submitted a tip to the Washington Department of Social and Health Services Elder Financial Exploitation Division. No name, just dates, power of attorney documentation, bank trail references, and medical obstruction notes. Then she turned to Beverly. Write the letters. Beverly, seated with a sleek laptop and legal template folder already open, didn't ask what kind. She'd been waiting for the cue. Revocation of power of attorney, notification to all known entities and institutions, witness signatures prepared, notarization already scheduled. 2 days later, Allison's access was officially severed. No more authorization to speak on Judith's behalf. No more access to funds. No more legal foothold inside the house she used for selfies and sangria. Judith didn't notify her directly. She let the letter arrive in the mail, certified, formal, and signed. That Tuesday, Allison's financial guy arrived with slick hair, shiny shoes, and a binder he didn't open fast enough. Judith met him in the front sitting room, Beverly present as a care assistant. The man smiled too broadly. Ms. Carter, it's such a pleasure. I think there's an opportunity here for you to relax. Let us manage the bulk. Judith cut in. Are you a fiduciary? He blinked. Well, no, but I'm a licensed. Then you're a salesman, she said. Meeting adjourned. He looked to Beverly, confused. I was told this would be more of a dialogue. It was, Beverly said, rising to usher him out. And now it's over. When the door shut, Judith went straight to her study. She dialed a number from memory. A gravel voice answered after 2 rings. Ron Dillard. It's Judith Carter. Judith. He exhaled. Heard what happened. You need me? I do. I need everything we used to talk about. Living trust. Longview protection, Ron chuckled. Still efficient as hell. Still alive, Judith replied. Within 3 days, the paperwork was signed. The house, deed, land, structure, was placed into an irrevocable trust. Judith was sole occupant and primary trustee. Beverly was successor. The copy of the trust binder now sat inside Judith's fireproof safe, just under her new will and executor file. The locks were changed, the titles updated, the authority silenced. Allison hadn't noticed yet, but she would. Soon. Because entitlement is loud, but consequences? They arrive in silence. And they stay. The doorbell rang at 3:07 p.m., 38 minutes earlier than the casual Friendsgiving drop-in Allison had texted about 2 nights ago, not that Judith had confirmed. Through the glass panel, Judith saw a familiar silhouette. Blonde curls, boots too high for fall comfort, arms full of boutique shopping bags, and an artisanal cider 6-pack. Behind her stood Brett, oversized grin and undersized manners, carrying a stack of disposable trays. Judith didn't move from her seat at the kitchen table. She didn't need to. Deputy Hartley opened the door. Afternoon, the uniformed officer said flatly, nodding toward them both. Name? Allison blinked. Allison Greer. This is my uncle's, my aunt's, place. We're here for Friendsgiving? Judith watched from the table as Brett's face crumpled in confusion, eyes darting around for an explanation that wouldn't sound like privilege. Deputy Hartley didn't flinch. Ma'am, you've been served. Trespass warning, effective immediately. Allison's arms dropped an inch. Wait, what? Judith stood, calm and slow, her linen blouse unwrinkled, her teacup steady in one hand, envelope in the other. She handed the envelope directly to Allison. Signed and notarized, Judith said, with attached copies delivered to local law enforcement and your prior counsel. Brett stepped forward. You can't be serious. We're family. Judith looked at him as if he were an exhibit she'd already toured. So were the ones who looted Rome. Allison's laugh cracked high and brittle. This is illegal. You can't just evict us from your life like this. I had power of... That power was revoked, Beverly said, emerging from the hallway with a glass of water and a printed email. As confirmed by this firm and witnessed by the court. She set the email in front of the deputy, who nodded. Allison opened her mouth to argue, but her phone buzzed. She glanced down. Unknown number, no ID. She picked it up. A firm voice answered, Ms. Greer, you're currently on speakerphone with Judith Carter's estate counsel. This call is being recorded. Allison flinched. In the same moment, from the side of the house, came a soft knock on the back patio door. A cousin, Marla, was attempting to sneak in through the mudroom with a bottle of wine and a hopeful grin. Beverly opened the door before she could finish her first excuse. You're on the list, Beverly said coldly. That list. Marla stepped back without another word. Inside, Deputy Hartley cleared his throat. You've got 10 minutes to gather your things, he said to Allison and Brett. Then I'll escort you out. After today, return once, and it's a chargeable offense. Unbelievable, Brett muttered. We were trying to help. We brought cider. Judith turned to the table, lifted her cup, and took a long, measured sip of Earl Grey. When she set it down, her voice was silk over ice. Next time, bring integrity. By 3:21 p.m., the foyer was empty. No boots, no trays, no laughter echoing off her walls. Beverly returned to the kitchen, flipped open her laptop, and slid a folder across the table. Civil claim packets are ready. Fraud, exploitation, medical negligence. We can file Monday. Judith looked up. File them. You sure? They mistook me for gone, she said. Let's make sure I'm remembered. Outside, the late November light bent low across the porch, catching the pale gold rim of her teacup. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt aligned. Every name, every account, every voicemail, every unauthorized expense, they were no longer proof of betrayal. They were building blocks, because Judith Carter wasn't just reclaiming her house, she was about to dismantle the very idea of what they thought she owed. And when the reckoning arrived, it wouldn't knock. It would enter, legally, relentlessly, and dressed in ink. Judith leaned back in her chair, eyes on the door that had just shut behind them. Let the real feast begin, she whispered. The receipts didn't just speak. They screamed. Judith Carter sat with her reading glasses low on her nose, laptop open, her financial advisor, Nico Tran, beside her with a spreadsheet the length of a courtroom confession. Beverly hovered behind them with a printed calendar, highlighters in 4 colors, and the kind of grim focus reserved for triage nurses and military strategists. Here, Nico said, tapping the screen. This charge, $1,028, was 2 days after your admittance. Catering company in Fife. Listed under event rental, Judith didn't flinch. Which card? Your secondary visa, the one tied to your old utility autopays, closed and flagged? Already. He scrolled. This one, Uber Eats, $412. One night, multiple restaurants, late-night orders. From my zip code? From your driveway, he replied. GPS data confirms it. Beverly chimed in without lifting her eyes. And this, she said, flipping to a printed invoice, is the folding lounge furniture Brett rented and delivered to your backyard. 4 benches, custom cushions, 2 heaters, billed to your American Express. I have the receipt. Judith sipped her water slowly. Her fingers moved as if typing invisible notes across the table. Build me the full timeline, she said. Admission to discharge. I want asset bleed by date and amount. I already started, Beverly said, handing her a color-coded sheet. Here's the sequence. You were admitted on the 3rd. On the 4th, Allison Venmo'd a deposit to the catering company. The 5th, your second day on a ventilator, your front porch security camera picked up 3 delivery drop-offs. Champagne, balloons, wine. Your bank shows 3 withdrawals between the 5th and 6th totaling $2,900. None were flagged. Judith didn't curse. She leaned back, folded her arms. And all of it, she said, done while I was unconscious. Beverly nodded. Like you were already gone. Worse, Judith said, like I never counted. By evening, every document was scanned and logged. Nico uploaded encrypted copies to the attorney's server. Beverly emailed time-stamped PDFs to a civil litigation paralegal Judith had once triaged for during a car pileup on I-5. She remembered that woman's broken wrist and swollen face. Now she'd be Judith's witness prep lead. The first demand letter went out the next morning. It was addressed to Allison Greer and Brett Samuel, hand-delivered by courier. Inside, a formal list of itemized expenditures, accusations of asset misuse, legal citations for financial exploitation, and a repayment deadline. It included screenshots, receipts, and security footage stills. Judith's kitchen filled with strangers while she lay intubated a city away. No response for 24 hours. Then came the calls. The first was a cousin from Spokane. "This isn't who you are. You don't need to make it public." The second was Allison's voicemail. "Aunt Jude, I'm honestly heartbroken. We just wanted to honor you." The third was Brett, low and bitter. "You've got no clue how this looks. People will talk." Judith saved each voicemail, labeled them by tone, plead, perform, threaten. On Thursday afternoon, a name Judith hadn't seen in years popped up in her inbox: Rhonda Vale, a former ER co-worker turned journalist for a healthcare column in the Pacific Northwest. Subject line: "Heard about what happened. If you ever want to go on record, anonymous or not, I'll make sure it's told right." Judith read it twice. She didn't reply. Not yet. She wasn't done collecting. She wasn't done remembering. And she wasn't finished building the ledger that would document what they'd taken. By Friday, Beverly had assembled a corkboard timeline in Judith's den, postcards of betrayal. The day of the Uber Eats splurge, circled. The day the Venmo pool was posted, flagged. The night of the party, photos arranged like evidence in a trial that was coming. That evening, Judith stood before the board, arms crossed, a file in her hand. "This," she said quietly, "isn't grief." "No," Beverly said behind her. "It's theft with hashtags." Judith nodded, then looked toward the guest room, the one Allison used to stay in on Thanksgiving weekends before the entitlement bloomed. She flipped off the light, not as a gesture, as a promise. The first thing to go was the old deadbolt. It had never failed her, but it had also never been asked to stand against betrayal. Now it clicked out of its housing with a soft metallic groan as Eli, the same locksmith from before, installed a sleek, matte black smart lock that blinked awake under his fingers. Beside him, 2 motion sensor cameras swung into position, one angled toward the front walk, the other catching the corners of the wraparound porch where Allison used to pretend to garden. By noon, Judith's house was fortified with silent dignity. Biometric gate at the side entrance, garage door keyed to her phone, no more hidden spare under the porch turtle, no more just family drop-ins. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint, sage and dove gray, no more rental white walls dulled with fingerprints. Her living room had been stripped down to its bones and remade, new rugs, new cushions, her late husband's war medals now shadowboxed above the mantel instead of buried in a drawer. The kitchen, once filled with champagne spills and strangers, gleamed. Judith had replaced every dish, every towel, even the silverware. No more shared utensils with people who'd toasted her supposed departure. By the end of the week, Beverly had hired a small crew, women in scrubs, retired CNAs, and one gentle hospice aide named Rena who couldn't stop crying when she stepped into Judith's refurnished sunroom. "It smells like kindness," Rena whispered. Judith didn't smile. She only nodded. "This house," she said, "owes you more than they ever did." She opened her doors, quietly, on weekends. No flyers, no press releases, just word of mouth among former nurses and caretakers who needed space to sit, breathe, rest. Judith made banana bread, Beverly brewed herbal tea. They played old jazz. No one asked for stories unless they were ready to tell their own. One woman left a note behind. "I haven't felt safe in a home since my last patient died. You gave that back to me." A week later, a local Tacoma news site ran a small feature. "When the family you raised turns on you, one woman's silent stand against elder exploitation." No names, no photos, Just quotes from legal filings, one anonymous interview, and a single image. Judith's hands holding a teacup, the caption reading, "Healing starts at the locks." The story trended for 2 days. The comments, though, lasted longer. "My sister stole my pension. I'm still recovering. I thought it was just me. This gave me courage." Finally, someone said it. Judith read every one. Not because she needed validation, but because she needed confirmation. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. That night, while reviewing the security log from her new door system, she noticed a failed entry attempt at 2:14 a.m. Incorrect code entered 3 times. She didn't need to guess. She simply deleted the alert. The next day, Beverly showed her a Facebook screenshot someone had forwarded. Allison had posted a cryptic message with a black and white selfie. "Funny how celebrating life turns into punishment. Guess joy's offensive now." Judith stared at it, unmoved, then closed her laptop. Instead of replying, she donated $5,000 anonymously to a reproductive rights foundation Allison had once ranted about over Thanksgiving stuffing, then another $3,000 to a racial equity scholarship, $1,200 to a low-income caregiver grant, each receipt she printed and folded into a red leather binder labeled "Undoing." Later that evening, she sat on the porch, blanket over her lap, tea beside her, the porch lights casting soft pools of gold across her new welcome mat. It read, "You made me a ghost. I made myself a fortress." She sipped slowly, eyes calm. Because Judith Carter hadn't just secured her home, she'd turned it into testimony. And there was more coming, because silence had a scent. And Allison? She was about to breathe it in. The email from Allison's attorney arrived on a rainy Monday morning. The subject line read, in all caps, "Request for return of gifted funds and estate access." Judith read it twice before passing the printed copy across the kitchen table to Beverly, who had just bitten into a piece of sourdough toast. Beverly didn't swallow before she said, "They're trying this now?" Judith calmly stirred her tea. Desperation is a form of creativity. According to the letter, Allison was asserting that many of the past financial transfers, holiday checks, paid semesters, the down payment for Brett's now flailing mobile bartending business were implied gifts tied to inheritance expectation. She was demanding access to Judith's estate planning documents to ensure transparency and prevent malicious exclusion. Judith replied with a 3-page packet of notarized counterfilings. Attached were timelines, credit card statements, the security footage from the party, and 2 affidavits from medical staff confirming Allison had delayed authorizing critical medications. The final page listed 10 unauthorized purchases and their timestamps, cross-referenced with photos of the party's progression. She sent it through her attorney with a simple subject line, "Transparency delivered. Kindly inhale." The backlash arrived quickly, but not where Allison expected it. That Thursday, Brett's business partner, a Seattle-based event coordinator named Megan, issued a press release distancing her brand from any affiliation with individuals under investigation for elder abuse, medical interference, or financial exploitation. Brett's name was listed in the 3rd paragraph. By Saturday morning, Judith released a single public statement, emailed to local news outlets and healthcare advocacy bloggers. "I was never dead. I was disrespected." No interviews, no elaboration, just 10 words and a name that refused to disappear quietly. Within 48 hours, the quote made its way to TikTok. A user called it Tea with Teens created a dramatic reading over footage of empty hospital hallways and champagne glasses being crushed in slow motion. It went viral in hours. Then Reddit found it. A thread titled, "This Aunt Came Back from the Brink and Went Full Gladiator" hit the front page. Anonymous posts soon followed. "I worked catering." That party wasn't about grief. It was a launchpad for her niece's new influencer brand. "I was on shift when she was intubated. POA delayed meds. Thought she wouldn't make it. I went to the party. I regret it." The comments piled up. So did the public sympathy. And still, Judith remained quiet. Until court papers arrived. A civil suit was officially filed. Greer versus Carter. Allison was suing for return of funds, defamation, and emotional distress due to social vilification. The tone was prim, righteous, and legally limp. Judith met with her attorney at a private estate law firm in Olympia. "She's leaning on public narrative," the attorney said. "Not evidence, but we have something else." "What?" "She took out a personal loan." Judith frowned. "On what?" "Your house. Weeks before you were discharged, we obtained the documents. She listed herself as heir occupant and cited your rapidly declining health as evidence of pending vacancy." For a long moment, Judith said nothing. Then, "Collateral fraud?" The attorney nodded. "Felony, if it sticks." Judith stood, straightened her collar, and shook the woman's hand. "Good. Let's make it stick." When the court date was set for mid-January, the docket quietly updated. 3 separate motions. One for civil damages, one for breach of fiduciary trust, and one for fraudulent financial documentation. Judith sat on her porch that evening, rain pattering on the awning, a soft playlist humming through her phone. Beverly joined her with a printout of the newest Reddit thread. She turned the house into a courtroom and won. Judith sipped her tea. "Not yet." "No," Beverly said, "but the verdict's already echoing." In the distance, a single car slowed outside her house. Headlights paused, then moved on. Judith didn't even look up, because she wasn't chasing justice anymore. She was pulling it, like a thread through every lie they told. And soon, that thread would tighten. The courtroom was cold, not frigid in temperature, but in tone, lined with beige paneling, metal chairs too polished to feel welcome, and the faint antiseptic sting of carpet cleaner and bureaucracy. Judith Carter arrived 5 minutes early, escorted by Beverly and her attorney, Ron Dillard, both dressed in charcoal gray. She wore navy wool, no jewelry except for her late husband's wristwatch, ticking steadily beneath her sleeve. Her entrance was quiet. Theirs wasn't. Allison stepped through the double doors like she was being filmed, flanked by 2 cousins and Brett in a borrowed blazer. Her blouse was pastel, her makeup dewy and deliberate. She dabbed at the corners of her eyes before anything had even started. Sympathy armor. Brett nodded once at the camera stationed in the back row, where a reporter from the Tacoma Register waited with a notepad and no expression. Judith didn't look at them. She took her seat, unfolded her binder. The judge, Honorable May Tillis, entered briskly, black robe, rimless glasses, no patience for theater. "Greer vs. Carter," she announced. "We'll begin with counsel statements, then evidentiary review." Allison's lawyer started with feigned gravity. "Your Honor, this is not about money. It's about misunderstanding. My client acted in what she believed were the best interests of her aunt." Ron rose without looking at him. "We'll let the records speak." They did. 3 hours of records, spreadsheets, medical timelines, POA authorizations that were never signed, time-stamped bank withdrawals, security footage with date overlays showing Brett laughing beside the buffet while Judith lay unconscious in ICU. Midway through, the judge paused. She adjusted her glasses and read slowly, from one exhibit, withdrawal of $2,000 from the primary account on November 5th, followed by 2 catering invoices, a champagne delivery, and a Venmo pool labeled Life Support Party. She turned her gaze to Allison. "You authorized these while she was intubated?" Allison hesitated. Then her voice cracked, perfectly pitched. "I didn't think she'd come back," she said softly. "I didn't mean—" Judith didn't flinch. She simply flipped to the next tab. The judge's voice remained level. "Intent doesn't negate misuse." Then came Brett's turn. His bank records had been subpoenaed and cross-referenced. 5 transfers in the days following the party, all into a private business emergency fund. One was dated the morning after Judith was released from the hospital. The courtroom fell so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Samuel, where exactly did you think the money was coming from?" Brett shifted. "I assumed Allison had permission." She didn't. No further questions. When Allison took the stand, her attempt at tears stumbled into a sob so forced even the reporter's pen paused mid-scratch. Her lawyer asked a leading question. She stared at the ceiling like it held the script. "I only ever loved her," she whispered. Ron didn't object. He waited, then rose slowly. Ms. Greer, would you describe love as authorizing a liquor delivery to someone else's home while your aunt couldn't swallow water? Her mouth opened, closed. No further questions. When the ruling came, it landed with the weight of a verdict years in the making. The judge ruled in Judith's favor, completely. Financial restitution, damages, public record of fiduciary breach, estate protections reinstated in full. Allison's attempts to regain POA were formally barred. The civil complaint was dismissed with prejudice. As the courtroom emptied, the family members peeled off one by one. No one met Judith's eye. Not the cousins who'd danced by her piano. Not Brett, whose cufflinks were already askew. Not Allison, whose shoulders hunched without an audience to play to. Judith remained seated, watching. Only when the last of them passed through the doors did she stand. Beverly offered her arm. Judith didn't take it. She walked forward alone, the sound of her heels measured and clean across the linoleum floor. Outside, reporters waited, but she didn't stop. Only one voice called out behind her, a soft, stunned whisper. She really did it. Judith turned once, just once, then kept walking, because the courtroom wasn't the end. It was the line in the sand, and now, everything that stepped across it would answer to her. The first call came 3 days after the verdict. Judith let it ring twice before answering, just enough time to register the name. Cousin Delia, once removed by both blood and behavior, whose only known appearance in Judith's life had been a potluck in 1996 and a poorly written condolence card 10 years later. "Jude," Delia gushed, too brightly. "I just wanted to say, I saw everything in the papers and wow, what a storm, huh? I mean, families go through stuff, right? But you really powered through." Judith listened. Quiet. Measured. Not a sound in her background, not even the clink of her teacup. Delia went on. "Anyway, I thought maybe we could reconnect. I've got some vacation days coming up and, well, I thought about stopping through Tacoma." Judith smiled faintly into the phone. "That's generous," she said. Delia paused, relieved. "So you're open to—" Judith hung up, blocked the number, then picked up her pen and added a line to her spiral notebook. Delia. Not just absent, seasonal. It wasn't the last call. Aunt Karen rang twice, leaving voicemails filled with sighs and, you know how kids get when they're stressed, as though financial exploitation and calculated betrayal were just youthful tantrums. An ex-neighbor texted, "Saw your name trending. Let's grab coffee?" Judith saved none of it. She simply deleted and blocked, like clearing mold from forgotten corners of a house she'd already gutted. By the end of the week, her phone was quieter. She liked it better that way. On Friday, Judith walked into the basement hall of a local community center where a flyer had led her. Support Circle, Financial Abuse Recovery for Seniors. The room smelled of coffee and peppermint creamer. The chairs were folding metal, arranged in a semicircle with intention. She took one on the edge. The others introduced themselves in soft, tentative voices, men and women with strained smiles and words like, "my son," "my niece," "the caregiver." Each story was different, but the ache behind the sentences was the same. When it was her turn, Judith looked around. "My name is Judith Carter," she said, her voice steady. "I was erased in advance, and then I woke up. No one asked for details." They nodded. Afterward, one woman touched her arm gently and said, "You made it through. That counts." Judith stayed after to help fold chairs. The next week, she signed on as a volunteer at a local legal clinic, intake desk, 2 shifts a week. She didn't give legal advice, just helped survivors gather papers, fill out forms, find words for what had been done to them. Beverly called it penance through purpose. Judith just called it forward motion. Mid-December brought rain, cold and constant, tapping at the windows like small truths that didn't want to be forgotten. One Tuesday afternoon, Maria, the ICU nurse who had once adjusted her IVs while her niece planned a party, stopped by. She brought pumpkin bread, still warm. Judith invited her in without hesitation. They sat in the kitchen with mismatched mugs and a playlist of old soul music drifting from the speaker. Maria smiled around a bite. "This is the quietest I've felt in weeks." Judith reached into a drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I wanted you to have something," she said. Maria blinked. "Judith, you don't—" Judith placed the pouch in her hand. Inside was a slender, antique silver locket, oval, etched with ivy leaves. It had belonged to Judith's mother, worn through wars and widowhood. "I kept it for when I might need strength," Judith said. "Turns out I already had mine. But you gave me air when others choked me." Maria's hands trembled around the chain. Her eyes welled. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Judith replied. "Just survive." They clinked their mugs together. Tea and coffee, old warmths, not to celebration, to reclamation. Later, as Maria left and the rain softened into mist, Judith stood at the door with her hands in her robe pockets. Her porch lights clicked on. The gates locked behind her guest with a soft mechanical sigh. And somewhere down the block, a shadow paused behind the wheel of a car. Headlights dimmed. Judith didn't flinch. She simply whispered, to no one in particular, "Let them watch," and shut the door with quiet grace. Judith Carter filed the nonprofit paperwork with a click of her mouse and an exhale she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Rescue the Roots. The name came to her in the kitchen one morning while watching steam curl up from a tea kettle, the same one she'd once nearly lost to careless party guests. "Because roots don't just grow," she told Beverly. "They recover, they re-anchor. And so will we." By the end of the month, the organization was real. Website live. EN confirmed. Launch fund secured from a modest inheritance she'd quietly reclaimed from frozen accounts. Beverly was named operations lead, her title official now, though her loyalty had never needed one. They started small. A 3-page downloadable guide for seniors to detect financial manipulation, a vetted list of estate planners who offered pro bono hours, a therapist directory for trauma-informed grief recovery. Judith's legal clinic connected them with first-hand cases, women and men, some still in court, others too embarrassed to say more than a whisper. By mid-January, a Tacoma news anchor did a follow-up segment. Then a Seattle podcast host reached out. Then NPR called. Judith turned down the book deal. She didn't want a memoir. She wanted a movement. But she agreed to the interviews, if they stayed focused on the facts, not the scandal, not Allison, not Brett. "My name is Judith Carter," she said into the mic during her first recorded episode. "And I'm here because I lived. Now I'm here so others don't lose what they still have." The episode reached number 7 on the Apple Podcast Health category within a week. Her mailbox, once full of bills and false sympathies, now held something else entirely. Cards, notes, letters, a purple envelope from Fort Lauderdale. A woman named Maureen had written, in precise cursive, "You saved me. I didn't even know it was happening until I heard your voice. You made me check. You made me act." Judith folded the letter neatly and placed it in her new red leather binder, right behind the donation receipts. Her house, once a battlefield, then a fortress, was changing again. Now it was a hub, not chaotic, never chaotic, but alive. Volunteers stopped by to drop off supplies. Lawyers used the dining room table for weekend consults. A grief counselor hosted a once-a-month circle in the sunroom. There were no Jell-O shots, only banana bread. Judith didn't host. She welcomed. She didn't control. She curated. Beverly once paused by the doorframe and looked around at the soft shuffle of shoes on rugs, the sound of gentle laughter from the kitchen, the flicker of a candle that no longer masked shame. "It's a house again," she said. "Not a monument." Judith nodded. "It's mine again." That night, Judith stood at her bedroom window, the city lights stretching westward like pinpricks of memory. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. A woman's voice, nervous, southern, mid-60s maybe. "Hi. I don't know if I should have called, but someone gave me your number, said your place, your nonprofit. It helps women like me." Judith didn't interrupt. "My son's been..." dipping into things. My account, my prescriptions. I keep telling myself it's stress. But I don't think it is. I think I'm disappearing in pieces. Judith stepped away from the window. Do you have a pen? She asked gently. The woman's voice cracked. Yes. I want you to write this down. You're not disappearing. You're dissolving under pressure someone else applied. That's not weakness. That's theft. And we can stop it. The woman sniffled. How? Judith smiled into the quiet. First you call me by my name. It's Judith, not a ghost, not a headline. Just Judith. There was silence on the other end. Then, Judith, I think you might have just changed my life. Good, Judith said. Now let's rescue yours. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the porch chimes she'd rehung by hand. Inside, her house was full. Not with guests, with proof. That something stolen could be restored, that silence could be made to speak, and that recovery was not a return, it was a reinvention, and tomorrow someone else would find her name, and this time they'd whisper it with hope. The notary's stamp landed on the final page with a clean, definitive press. Judith Carter didn't blink. She simply nodded once and handed Beverly the pen. Sign here, she said. Beverly looked up, the weight of the moment in her hand. Are you sure? You've bit everything they weren't, Judith said. So yes, you're the executor and the heir. It wasn't sentiment, it was structure. A final architectural note in the house Judith had spent the last year rebuilding, not with drywall and locks, but with truth. The home itself was already in a trust, but now it would live beyond both of them. She'd filed the papers days earlier. Upon her passing, the house would transition to sanctuary grant status, a long-term haven for retired nurses and palliative caregivers, a place for those who'd once helped others die to finally learn how to rest. Judith had left detailed notes on everything. What kind of tea should be stocked, where to keep extra blankets, which wine chimes had the best resonance. There was a list of banned air fresheners, no artificial lavender, a CD stack labeled For Grief, Ella Fitzgerald mostly, and a handwritten recipe for the banana bread that now had a soft cult following in the local support circle. Only one part of her legacy planning felt indulgent, her funeral, but even that she handled with surgical precision. She picked the music, Nina Simone, Sam Cooke, and one haunting Appalachian folk tune no one else could find online. No speeches, just one line she wanted someone, anyone, to read aloud. She rose not by their grace, but by her own gravity. In a small cedar box on her nightstand sat a folded square of gold foil napkin. Jude vibe. Judith had found it again tucked inside a book of poetry she hadn't opened in months. She stared at it for nearly an hour the night she decided what to do with it. And then, on a Saturday morning, after the frost had lifted but before the soil hardened again, she took a spade to the backyard. She walked to the far corner beneath the maple tree where the new bench sat, dug 6 inches down, dropped the napkin inside, covered it with earth. It wasn't ceremony, it was compost. A week later, a letter arrived, real ink, cursive loops, no return address but a familiar lean to the letters. Allison. Judith opened it on the porch, a full page of apology, rambling, regret layered with justification. I was scared. I was under pressure. You meant more to me than I ever knew. At the end, I hope you can forgive me someday. I hope I still get to call you family. Judith read it once, then, without emotion, fed it into the shredder beside her desk, because remorse mailed like a greeting card wasn't redemption. It was theater, and Judith didn't perform anymore. That evening, she made stovetop popcorn in her grandmother's old pot. No oil spray, real butter, real salt. She curled into her armchair with an old black-and-white comedy and watched the entire thing alone, shoulders shaking with laughter at punchlines no one else remembered. She hadn't laughed like that in years. Not politely, not cautiously, just laughed. Later, she opened her laptop to respond to an email from a law student seeking internship hours with Rescue the Roots. She typed a warm reply, sent the intake form, then she clicked into her signature settings. Name, title, org site, and at the bottom, in italics, she added, Resurrected, not for you. The house was still, not empty, just settled. Judith looked around the room, the shelves filled with carefully chosen books, the throw pillows perfectly lived in, the faint scent of peppermint and dust. She breathed it in. A knock sounded at the front door. Gentle, not urgent. She didn't flinch. She stood slowly, wiped her hands on her cardigan, and walked toward the sound. Because now, she wasn't guarding anything, she was gifting it, and only those who understood the difference would ever cross her threshold again. Next, a name from the past appears, with a debt, a secret, and a reason she never expected. The invitations weren't printed, they were written, by hand, in soft ink on textured ivory paper. No RSVP cards, no glitter, no hashtags. Just a date, a time, and 6 words at the bottom. Come only if your love stayed. Judith Carter turned 63 on a Wednesday. The gathering was on a Saturday. No one used the word party. It began at dusk, when the sun had dipped just enough to warm the sky without stealing attention. Beverly greeted guests at the porch gate, offering soft-spiced cider and woolen wraps instead of wristbands. Inside, the house pulsed, not with volume, but with something slower, steady, like heartbeat percussion. The living room was arranged with intention, mismatched chairs from different decades, a low table with thumbed-through poetry books, and a long butcher block countertop lined with potluck comfort food, sweet potato casserole, baked macaroni, shepherd's pie with rosemary. No catering tags, no menu hashtags, just handwritten labels, for warmth, for healing, for staying. Judith entered the room quietly, as she always had, no announcement, no flourish, just presence. She wore a sapphire blue scarf rich as moonlight over deep water, her husband's favorite color, a quiet rebellion against all the beige. The world had tried to wrap her in. As she moved through the house, people rose, not to applaud, not to capture her, but to meet her with real arms, real warmth. One nurse kissed her hand, another hugged her so long the room seemed to exhale with them. A woman from the support group offered her a folded note, blushed, then stepped aside. Someone whispered, near the bookshelves, eyes damp, "This is what celebration looks like." No one posed, no one performed. They arrived. In the sunroom, where she once lay ghost-like behind IV lines, someone read aloud a short poem about reclamation. Another guest played a single cello line so soft it felt like breath. Judith sat at the edge of the rug, cup in hand, heart steadied by years of ache. And then, without cue or command, everyone quieted. Beverly stepped into the center holding nothing, not a microphone, not a script. She simply turned to Judith. "Would you like to say something?" Judith stood slowly, scarf trailing lightly behind her, like a banner earned, not inherited. She raised her glass, not champagne, but chamomile. "To those who mourned me before I was gone," she said. Her voice was calm, clear. She scanned the room. "And to those who never left, even when I was written off, even when I was rewritten entirely." Silence. Not hollow. Held. I was celebrated before I healed. I was consumed before I recovered. And now, she paused, lowering the glass just an inch, I rebuild. Not alone, not for them, but with all of you, who never asked for proof I was worth staying for. She took a sip. Everyone else followed. No one clinked their glasses. They just stood. No phones, no posts, no curated joy. Just witnessing. Later, when the casserole dishes were scraped clean and the last warm cider was poured into to-go thermoses, Judith walked through the kitchen in stocking feet. She stopped at the window. The porch was lit with soft amber lights. The wind chimes gave only the barest sound, like whispers from a better version of the world. She turned, found Beverly already packing leftovers. Judith touched her shoulder. "I didn't think I could ever have something like this," she said. "Not after everything." "You didn't have it," Beverly replied, sealing a container. "You made it." Judith nodded. At the sink, a teenager from the legal clinic was rinsing dishes, sleeves rolled high, humming a song too new for Judith to know. The house had sound again. Not noise, not spectacle. sound that stayed. Judith stepped into her room as the last guests left. She laid the scarf gently across her chair, changed into soft cotton, and opened her inbox out of habit. One new message. No subject line, no signature, just 5 words. "You turned the tide, Judith." She read it 3 times, then closed the laptop and turned off the light, because now there was only one celebration she needed to prepare for. The kind that didn't end when the guests left, but the kind that began the very next morning. The first line of the memoir came to Judith while watering the basil in her kitchen window. "I wasn't unplugged from life, I was disconnected from dignity." She scribbled it onto a yellow legal pad, tucked between herbal recipe cards and a receipt for new porch pillows. At the top of the page, she wrote the title, "Plugged Back In." She wasn't rushing it. The book wasn't a weapon. It was a witness. Every month, she hosted seminars in the sunroom, small circles of caregivers, trauma survivors, and patients with fresh wounds wrapped in gauze and silence. They talked about autonomy, power, and grief. They traded strategies like recipes, how to say no without guilt, how to spot the lie beneath, "I was just trying to help." No sponsors, no cameras, just clarity. One Saturday morning, the group sat with cups of rosemary tea while Judith passed around handouts titled, "You're not ungrateful, you're just awake." Laughter rose from the table, low, knowing, bruised but beautiful. Outside, her garden had grown reckless with life. Tomatoes spilled over their beds. Lavender climbed the porch rail. Herbs burst from ceramic pots labeled courage, rest, and boundaries. And inside? The house was loud in a new way. Music floated in from the kitchen. Someone from the legal clinic danced barefoot while folding towels. 2 nurses argued good-naturedly about pie crusts. The wind chimes didn't compete anymore, they accompanied. The fire pit in the yard had become ritual. Cool nights meant blankets on benches, hot cider in recycled mugs, and stories told not to impress, but to expel. Judith didn't always speak. She didn't have to. Sometimes just being the one who'd made it was enough. One crisp evening, she walked out barefoot, no coat, no cane, across the damp lawn. She closed her eyes, tilted her head toward the sky, and whispered softly, "Thank you." To the soil, to her legs, to the body that held her through betrayal, needles, ventilators, and silence. Behind her, Beverly leaned against the doorway with 2 mugs. "You always do that barefoot thing." She opened to the final page, wrote slowly, no flourish, no drama. Just one line. "I reclaimed everything they tried to name without me." She closed the book gently, slid the strap around it, and set it beside the bench. The wind picked up. The chimes above the porch rang once, then stilled. From inside, someone started a Nina Simone record, track 3. Judith leaned back, breathed in, and smiled. Not the smile of a victor, the smile of someone who remembered what it felt like to almost be erased, and then rewrote the ending with her own hand. She looked toward the darkened garden, the faint glow of the pathlights flickering like small promises. Because the power they pulled? She took it back. Plugged in. Rooted deep. And this time, the current ran only for her.